Each year during my Florida photography workshops, one of my favorite stops along the way is always this osprey nest, which I've been filming and photographing since 2014. What makes this nest so unique is that you can get on the roof of or the top level of a parking garage nearby, and it gives you an eye level view right into the nest, which is pretty rare, as usually their nests are fairly high up in trees or on platforms or things like that. When I first arrived this year, it appeared that the female mostly was still sitting on eggs, but it wasn't until maybe a day or two later that the osprey were starting to show signs that the eggs may be hatching. And sure enough, that was the case. And maybe even another day or two after that, I started to see little tiny heads popping up underneath the adults. Something interesting just to notice is how the adults move around the nest. They take their talons and they clench them into almost like a fist, just making sure that they're not stepping on the chicks accidentally as they maneuver around the nest. The male for this pair generally does most of the fishing, and on one afternoon, he came back with a largemouth bass. And I was torn between photos and video. I really wanted the video of him coming into the nest, but there were a few different factors that made me decide to shoot the photos here. One, based on the wind direction, we could tell that the male was going to come from the back side of the nest, which meant head on shots coming right at us, which is kind of rare. Usually he comes in from the side. And also that he was carrying the fish whole. A lot of times he'll stop and eat the head first, and then he'll just bring the rest of the body in, which doesn't make for the best photos. So that's why I decided to at least shoot a couple photos of him landing, and then I switched over to video right after that. It wasn't long after the male delivered the bass to the nest that it started raining, and I was actually excited about that. I just think rain in wildlife photography, for whatever reason, just makes everything that much more interesting and just gives it that much more of a dramatic look. I love watching the raindrops splashing off of the backs as they feed the chicks here. And you can see at this point too that the chicks are growing. They're a couple weeks old at this point. And this clip here made me laugh because you could see the piece of the fish that the male gives to the chick is just far too big for him to eat. And he gave it his best effort, but he just was not able to get this down. All the clips in this video were filmed with a Canon R5, a Canon R3, a 600 millimeter f4 lens, a 400 f4 DO lens, and my 100 to 500 millimeter lens. But I decided I wanted some really tight close-ups of the chicks, so for these clips here, I had put on my 2x extender on my 600 millimeter on the R3, and that's how I got such a close, intimate look at the chicks here. When you have a busy scene like this, when you're shooting wildlife video, you've got three birds here. You had at one point a whole fish, a bunch of sticks that can fool the camera's autofocus system. This is where you really want to use manual focus, or at least that's how I do it. I turn on my focus peaking and I just manually focus in the area I want. That keeps the autofocus from hunting in and out, jumping all over the place. And that way you know you're going to get consistent focus on what you're trying to get. So for me, I just use the front chick as my focal point, and I shot at about f8, and that's what I highly recommend because your autofocus is going to just really struggle in this point. It's not going to know which bird you're trying to get. One of the harsh realities of filming osprey or any bird of prey is just realizing that they're killers, and sometimes they even kill each other. I've seen it year over year in this nest. Usually one or two of the chicks are dominant and they'll kill the third. Sometimes there's one dominant chick and it kills the other two. It did happen again this year. One of the chicks hatched far later than the first two and was much smaller. You'll see in the clips just how much smaller he was than the other two. It never really had a chance and it would eventually die. And the parents would even stop feeding it at one point, which, us as humans, we can't really grasp that concept. But, these animals, they are not going to waste their effort, their energy on a chick that they know that is just not going to make it. And it's sad, but it is what it is. But it doesn't make it easy to watch or to film. As the chicks continue to grow, the opportunity to see the male returning with fish becomes greater as they need to eat more. It seems like the female's constantly calling for food, the male's bringing fish in quite frequently. But other than that one series with the bass that I showed earlier, I really didn't get too many great opportunities, as a lot of times they were back or butt shots or from the side. And this nest, as you probably saw in the beginning, is in an urban area, so there's not a lot of pretty backgrounds other than one main little area. So it does make photographing them a challenge as they're flying in. But once they're in and they get to feed here, it does make for some good video opportunities. And again, the close-up looks at least. So it's good for that. I made one last stop at the nest before heading home, and at this point the chicks were about 5 weeks old. Both of them were still alive. There was one chick that did seem to be a little bit more dominant than the other, but both were still getting fed, so that's a good sign. And it was a good season with them. It was nice to be able to see them from hatching to this point. In previous years, I didn't really have the time to do that, so I made it a point to make sure I got the full series this year, which I was able to do. So hopefully, if you're still watching at this point, you enjoyed it, please subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. Hopefully I have a lot more videos like this coming in the future. Thanks for watching.